you're curious about growing broccoli in the summer and into the fall and even into the winter, that is what I'll be talking about in this video. Hi, my name is Landon Gilfill. I'm a Pepper and Pine Garden Design, and today I want to show you the broccoli that I started in my house about 3 weeks ago, towards the end of May, beginning of June, where it's at now and how I plan to plant it out in the garden right now to get a mid to late summer harvest, an early fall harvest, and eventually a fall to winter harvest. I have several varieties of broccoli I'm going to grow this year. Some of them I had actually started way back in February or March and lost them all in a really bad freeze/rainstorm flood that happened in April. And that's actually okay, because I've learned more and more that trying to grow broccoli in the spring in Southwest Michigan generally ends up in a futile effort because it bolts so quickly when the temperature happens between the spring and the early summer weather. So actually growing broccoli in the summer into the fall is better here in Southwest Michigan to get a better crop. So I'm starting again, or I have started again, and the two varieties that I'm starting with is a DeCicco, which is an Italian heirloom broccoli, and a Romanesco, which is also an Italian variety of broccoli. Now, these are two different types, and I've gone into links about how to grow broccoli in Southwest Michigan in a blog post I'll post below. I go through the different varieties that you can grow anywhere, but specifically I'm focusing on Southwest Michigan, the different categories of broccoli, from sprouting to calabrese to like your broccoli rabe or rob, that have the longer stalks, the smaller heads that aren't so tightly woven. Both of these, again, are an Italian variety that are more of your calabrese type broccoli, so tightly woven heads. And the DeCicco in particular is a smaller calabrese variety that'll be ready in 48 to 50 days. So because I started this in my house about a month ago, this will be ready in the next 3 to 4, possibly 5 weeks, which is awesome. So I'll be harvesting this here in July and maybe early August. And that was the goal, to have some broccoli right now here in this summer that I could be eating from. The next broccoli that I started was the Romanesco broccoli. This one is ready between 75 and 100 days. So after my DeCicco broccoli has come to harvest, this one will be coming to fruition. And the reason we have such a range of dates there, 25 days in particular, is because once you've harvested that central head, a lot of times you'll get smaller heads that will pop up from that area. And that's the same with cabbages and cauliflower and most broccoli types. You'll get those side shoots of broccoli, which is why that you have that date range. That date range is also there because you can have a range of germination time depending on when you've sown the seeds, how you're growing them inside, outside. So that's why you have that general date range. But it's also with broccoli in particular, because of those development of the side shoots 2 to 3 weeks after you've harvested that central head. So this Romanesco is such a cool variety. It's just has this really neat spiral pattern that you see there. It's like a lime yellow green. It really pops in the garden if you love color in your garden. So this is gonna be a really fun variety to grow. And then after that, here in the next week or so, maybe 2 weeks, I'm gonna start the Waltham broccoli. I haven't decided my exact date for starting this, but the goal with this one is for it to be harvested really in the fall. So September, October, maybe even into November. Waltham 29 is a very frost hardy, cold hardy broccoli variety. So I could be growing this even past our first frost date so that I can continue my harvest into the early winter. Now there will become a point where if I'm still growing this, I would need to cover it with a frost cloth or some sort of protection from the heavier snow. But for the most part, this one is a really frost hardy, cold hardy variety. So my goal here is to have broccoli continuing to be harvested into the winter, and even past that, I'll be starting a fourth broccoli called purple sprouting broccoli, which I also talk about in my blog post below. That's a whole nother category of broccoli that's known for its many side shoots. Its maturity date is 180 to 200 days, and that's because you start that broccoli about July, August. It'll grow through the winter. It may need some protection during that time period, and then you'll actually harvest it in the early spring. So that is what my goal is, to be able to harvest that in the early spring, since I'm not really able to start broccoli in the spring like I would like to here in Southwest Michigan. So I am about to purchase my seeds for those so I can be starting them here in July and August. And I'm really excited to give that broccoli a try. So these are the broccoli seedlings that I started about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And they're about 2 to 3 inches high. So they're really perfect to go into the garden. The plan is today. This is the DeChico variety. And you see a random corn seedling there that popped up out of my seed starting mix. So I've got about 35 plants here, if I've counted correctly. And then over here, I've got my Romanesco. Now I started these at the same time, again, because these will be ready to harvest about 25 days after this variety. So it made sense to start them at the same time. So these will come to harvest. I'll have, and then I'll be able to start harvesting these. And by that point, I'll be getting my Waltham broccoli in the ground to be harvesting that. If you want to know more about how to start your broccoli from seed, how to put it in the ground, your time frames, what they need, all of that is in that blog post below. It really gets into the nitty-gritty of the different categories of broccoli, the different types, how you can space them out with your particular growing season and growing calendar. But I'm really excited to go get these in the ground today. So let's go get that started. So I'm out in the garden. And I originally had a different plan for where this broccoli was going to go. But as it's turned out, I've ended up filling up my beds over in what I call the east or the cool season garden, where I have most of my cabbages and broccoli and cauliflower and chard. So the broccoli is actually going in this extra space that I actually have here in my west garden, where I've got all my tomatoes and peppers and zucchini and a lot of those more warm season plants. So it's really not going to matter. It's going to have its own space here. And I'm just glad I have the room to get it filled in. So I have, like I said, I have these 2 different varieties, and they actually have different spacing requirements. So the DeChico, since it's a smaller variety, only needs about 18 inches between each plant. And I'm going to try to stagger those between the rows. I've got a 4-foot wide bed, 4 foot by about 25 feet when I consider the spacing around it. So I'm going to plant a stagger like this, so it gives my plants a little bit more space. If you can think about a dice with a 5 on it, you've got the 2 here, and 1 in the center. That's what it's going to look like down the row until I get to the Romanesco. The Romanesco is a much bigger broccoli plant. It's going to need 2 feet for that particular plant. So when I get down there, I'm just going to basically have a block of 4 with 2 feet for each plant. Now, similar to sunflowers, I'm going to do a comparison here that's kind of odd. The more space you give a broccoli plant, the bigger it will grow. It's actually the same thing for sunflowers. If you space them closer, their heads will be smaller. If you space broccoli closer, their heads will be smaller. So if you give them enough space for their leaves to really sprawl out, which is what a Romanesco and a Waltham are going to do, they'll have those really nice big heads. So I want to make sure I'm giving them plenty of room in the garden to sprawl out. If I want to plant smaller, quicker to mature plants in between them, like an intensive gardening style or interplanting, I can absolutely do that, and I might, depending on what I still have left in the house to plant. But for now, I'm going to space these out with the DeChico being in that staggered 5 spacing, and then the Romanesco, I'm going to space out about 2 feet per plant all the way around. So I'm actually using a yardstick to make sure that I space these out correctly, just because it's so important to the plant, like I mentioned. So whether you have a yardstick or just a regular ruler or a book, or whatever you use that you've measured out, I want to make sure that I've got these spaced accordingly. And so far I've estimated right. 2 inches more, that's okay. I'm right at about 21 inches, and it's okay if I've given them more space than less space. So I had to go grab this because I realized I wanted to be really accurate with my spacing here. The other thing I wanted to mention is these seedlings are much smaller than the seedlings that I had planted back in April. And that's because those seedlings had been in my house longer, and I had actually transplanted them from these small plugs into a bigger cup, like a solo cup or a styrofoam cup. So they had more time to grow and more space to grow. Because the weather outside is perfect this week, we have really like 70s, mid 70s, up into maybe the low 80s. This is great transplanting weather. So I'm just going to move these directly into the ground. It's okay that they look this small, they'll do fine. And another thing that I learned from Charles Dowding is that really setting the seedling down into the ground a little bit where it feels like it's a little low is okay, because it's really going to give that plant a lot of structure and foundation to start growing instead of being wobbly and on top of the surface of the ground, especially if it were to rain. Now, I've been watering these plants from the top since they were wee little things, just to make sure that their stems were strengthened. There's a couple of them that look kind of puny, but for the most part, these have been outside on my back porch growing, with the exception of when they were germinating, and I've been watering them from the top, so they should be able to handle rain and the crazy temperatures that happen out here in the spring and early summer. So I'm gonna get to getting these in the ground, but I will show you here in a second exactly what this looks like. Okay, so I got the broccoli planted and actually used way more space than I really had thought in my mind I would use, but it's great. I used almost 3/4 of this bed down there, and down where you see those bigger bushes are some potatoes that came up from last year that I must not have dug up. So potatoes and brassicas actually do well together, so that works out. So I probably have about, I don't even know, 60 plants put in here. I'll have to do a final count after the video. But they're in the ground. I watered this ground really well this morning before I planted them, so they should be fine. It's starting to heat up a little bit, but because they've been outside in this heat for the last 2 weeks at least, they should be fine. And I'll just have to keep an eye on them and see how they do. If nothing else, even if only 2/3 of these make it, that'll be enough for my family and I, especially if I'm succession planting broccoli throughout the season. So again, if you're curious more about growing broccoli in your garden throughout the summer and fall, especially in Southwest Michigan, be sure and check out that blog post down below. And as always, my name is Landon Gilfillan here at Pepper and Pine Garden Design, growing gardeners and their gardens, and we'll see you in the next video.